Captain Corin Marek regained consciousness with the taste of copper and ozone in his mouth and the wrecked fuselage of the Rook groaning around him. Borealis 3 sprawled outside like a fever dream. Glass dunes wind carved into rippling waves, and far off, a violet aurora clutching the sky's low clouds. His emergency beacon pinged the void at regular intervals. The stars didn't answer. On day 3, the air smelled of warmed resin and dust, and the tiny water recycler in his suit had begun to compile a list of complaints. He staggered from the cracked cockpit, recalibrated his translator, and scanned for metals he could salvage. Instead, he found sound, not metal, but a cry. Sharp, terrified, tripping along the dune crests like thrown beads. Corin froze, then began to run, boots biting into fused silica, heat bleeding up through the soles. The cry fractured into snarls and a yelp that made his shoulders tense. Beyond a knifed ridge, he saw them 3 basalt skin scavengers, all elbows and plated jaws, muscling a 4th figure against a blown glass outcrop. She was lit like a flame against the pale dune, orange fur catching the sun, ears canted back, tail fluffed with fear. Not fully human, her face was human beautiful with high cheekbones and amber eyes, but foxish ears crowned her hair, and beneath a torn cloak her legs balanced in a digitigrade stance, quick and coiled. "Back away," Corin shouted. His translator lagged, then chirped something in harsh clicks. The closest scavenger turned with a hiss. Corin put a plasma bolt into its shoulder, the impact smearing molten slag across the glass. The second lunged. Corin fired again, heat recoil blooming through his arm. The third weighed its odds, decided it liked living, and scuttled over the ridge with the yowling wounded. Silence fell, broken only by the song of the wind combing the dunes. The vulpine woman pressed a hand to a shallow cut at her temple. When she looked at Corin, he felt, not gratitude exactly, not yet, but an alertness like she were measuring the shape of him. "You heard me," she said, voice husky but steady. "And you came." "Seemed rude not to," Corin replied, lowering his rifle. "I'm Corin Marek, human, very stranded." She blinked, then inclined her head. Naira Sylvain, Embereach ward of the Auric Vulpri. A small smile tugged her mouth. "And very saved." Naira's people did not thank with words, she explained as they walked, she with light, bouncing steps along the windward slope, he sliding and cursing under his breath. They thanked with deeds. "We have a custom," she said, glancing back to make sure he followed. "When one throws their body between a hunter and a blade, the Ember remembers." "The Ember," Corin echoed. She tapped the pendant at her throat, a shard of amber threaded with silver and lit faintly from within like a coal that remembered flame. "We say the Ember lives in the marrow of brave acts. It binds warmth to warmth." "Sounds poetic," Corin said. He kept to himself that poetry rarely repaired hull plating. The dunes ended in a canyon of frozen waves where the wind had carved glass into ribbed vaults. Beyond, a valley opened, terraces of obsidian soil, terracotta rooftops, and catwalks strung between living basalt columns veined with bioluminescent resin. Kits hung drying in the sun. Reed mats, copper wire, bright cloth. Vulpre moved through the terraces in a rhythm that was part dance, part work. Humanoid figures with mobile, tufted ears and tails used for balance like a second pair of hands. Naira lifted a hand. Voices answered from the catwalks. "My aunt will want to meet you," she said. "She is High Weaver of the Pact. Also a master of reminding me when I forget to be careful." They crossed a rope bridge to a broad platform where a woman with graying russet fur waited. Her posture had the sort of ease that comes from years of being deferred to. "Naira," she said, eyes flicking over the cut at her temple. Then her gaze settled on Corin with an interest neither hostile nor soft. "And you bring a fire, bold stranger." "High Weaver," Naira said, bowing. "Corin Marek." He stood in the way. The scavengers ran. The High Weaver touched the pendant at her throat. Then the Ember noticed. "To Corin," she added, "we will honor the pact at dusk." "I appreciate hospitality," Corin said carefully, "but my ship—" "We also appreciate ships," the High Weaver replied, mouth quirking. Eat first, decide second. Repair third. In that order, the heart stays calm. The sun slid toward the canyon rim, light becoming gold syrup over glass. Drums began soft, like heartbeats at rest. Naira murmured the pact of warm hands. It marks a bond opened by risk. It can be a pledge of guardianship or of life pairing if both consent. It's not assumed. She looked up at him through her lashes, ears angled forward. But refusing the first level would be impolite. Good thing I took a class in alien etiquette, Corin said, dry. He hadn't. He stood straighter anyway. The High Weaver's voice carried. Corin Marek stood between. Naira Solvane, ward in danger. Do you accept the Ember's memory? Do you open hands? I do, Naira said, with an ease that made Corin's chest ache. He swallowed. He was stranded. These people were not. I do. They each held their palms over the ember bowl. Heat licked, not burning, but insistently present, and a shimmer passed over Corin's skin, a prickle like static. The crowd exhaled as one. Naira smiled, eyes bright. When her fingers brushed his, he felt it again. A subtle warmth, not in his hand but behind his sternum, as if a small fire had been coaxed to life there. The first door opens, the High Weaver said. Guard and guarded, warmed and warming. In time, if the ember grows, another door may open. For now, eat. Eating meant spiced root stew and flatbread crisp with seeds, shared on mats in a loft that smelled of resin and sun. Naira sat with knees tucked sideways, tail curled around her ankles. You didn't have to agree, she said softly once the noise receded. We would have honored you anyway. I know, Corin said. I also know I'm going to need friends to get the rook back in the sky. Naira's smile widened, practical and brave. Dangerous combination. Days found their cadence. Naira taught Corin to move over glass without breaking it, to read wind for slicing eddies, to listen for the whisper of shifting dunes. In return, Corin showed Naira the rook, the shattered heat shield, the snapped antenna array, the avionics that sulked, unless bribed with patience. Vulpine tinkers came with spools of hammered copper and vials of conductive resin that lit like bottled lightning when warmed. Your circuits are rigid, a tinker named Jas critiqued, tail flicking. Our resin flows. Let it glide around breaks. The current will learn new paths. That's not how electricity works, Corin began. Then he rubbed a hand over his jaw. On Aurealis 3, maybe it is. They wove a hybrid, ship bone and valley sinew. The resin responded to his touch, brightening when he was steady, flickering when he was frustrated. Naira laughed when it pulsed stubbornly. It likes you, she said. It also does not enjoy your swearing. Evenings were for music. The vulpine sang in rounds that braided like river currents. Their language learned his mouth, soft consonants, vowels that stretched like hammock ropes. The ember warmth thrummed gently whenever Naira sat too close and pretended it was to show him a knot he already knew. One night, on a catwalk lit in low amber, she said, "The ember speaks best with shared breath." She blew across the pendant at her throat. It flared and warmed. If I breathe, and you breathe, sometimes it listens better. Is that a metaphor? Corin asked, throat suddenly dry. It can be, her ears tipped in mischief. It can also be a kiss. He didn't pretend not to want it. They leaned in. When their lips met, the pendant at her throat warmed like a small hearth in winter, and the warmth behind Corin's sternum flared in answer. Not a binding, not yet. That door remained closed and respected, but a promise that breath knew breath and liked what it found. Peace never lasts unchallenged. Scouts returned with ears flattened and eyes hard. Ridge clans, Jas said, jaw tight. They saw resin coils and copper spools. They smelled a ship. The Ridge clans weren't like the 3 scavengers Corin had chased off. They were organized, their armor cut from black stone, their spears tipped with magnetite that drank heat. They liked taking. They liked making it hurt. The High Weaver's tail was very still when she called the council. "We will not give," she said. "We will not run. We will not be foolish." Her gaze found Corin. "And we will use every cleverness the strange sky man has offered us." Cleverness meant traps that used the dune winds to funnel attackers into blind pockets of shifting glass. It meant stringing copper through the catwalks to make a crude induction grid powered by resin cores. It meant teaching vulpine archers to time their shots to the grid's pulse so arrowheads carried a kiss of charge. "War stories are full of last stands," Naira murmured, eyes on the ridge crest where dust plumes unfurled. "I prefer first stands. First, firm, and final." Corin checked the rook's jury-rigged cannon. Naira flicked an ear, amused. "A pact does not make me a kitten. It makes you someone I don't want to lose." For once, she didn't tease. She squeezed his wrist, claws careful. "Then, let's choose not to be lost." The Ridge clans came at dawn, their leader wearing a helm carved like a crag gull's skull. They roared down the glass like falling knives. The vulpine answered with drums that thudded in the chest and arrows that hissed like rain. Corin triggered the induction grid. Copper hummed underfoot, hairs on his arms rising. The first wave of raiders stumbled when their metal bits kissed the current. Vulpine pulled them down with ropes and swift kicks. Corin waited, then fired the rook's cannon at the boulder jam that formed the choke point at the canyon mouth. The shot punched through, the boulder sagged, and a sheet of glass avalanched shimmering knives into the path of the second wave. The leader saw enough to realize this valley wasn't meat. He signaled retreat with an ugly horn. The rear guard threw hooked lines to harass the catwalks. One hooked Naira's railing, yanked her forward. She slipped, tail lashing, feet clawing glass. Corin didn't think, he moved. He dove, grabbed the line above the hook with both hands, and let go of the catwalk. The line burned his palms. He swung, slammed into the pillar, jammed a boot under the railing, and with a grunt drove his plasma cutter into the hook. It melted. The line snapped. Naira fell backward onto the catwalk, breath knocked out, ears flattened in shock. Corin hung from his boot and one screaming arm until Jas hauled him up, cursing. After the dust settled and the Ridge clans dragged their wounded away, the valley shook out tension with laughter that was half sob. Naira stepped into Corin's space. He smelled smoke and resin in her. "You threw your body between again?" she said, voice very quiet. "Not once. Twice." He didn't say he'd do it 100 times. He didn't need to. The ember in his chest made its own small vow. Dusk laid honey light over the valley. The High Weaver's eyes were thoughtful when she called the circle again. "The ember remembers repeated warmth," she said. "It may ask another question." Naira's hands trembled, ever so slightly, as she held them over the ember bowl beside Corin. The heat rose, pulsing. 1, 2, 3. And then it grew. Not bright, not burning, simply present. It felt like a room whose door had been ajar finally opening wide enough to step inside. "The second door offers life pairing," the High Weaver said. "Not compelled, not presumed, chosen." Naira turned to Corin, ears forward, eyes bright and wet. "We could wait," she said, voice catching. "Learn, test, tease. Or we could do what the Ember wants and admit we've been choosing since the dunes." Corin thought of the rook half-mended. He thought of the beacon crying into an indifferent sky. He thought of the way the valley's night noises had already become familiar. He thought of Naira teasing, Naira fierce, Naira soft and laughing. He thought, and he didn't need more thinking. "I choose," he said, stepping into warmth as if into a spring after winter. "With you." They breathed together over the ember. It flared, and the warmth behind Corin's sternum spread through his ribs, his throat, his eyes. The pendant at Naira's throat glowed like a nest of coals freshly stirred. The High Weaver's voice blurred by tears he didn't expect. Witnessed. Warm hands pledged. "May your breath stay brave." The vulpine believed intimacy was a craft with two looms, a loom of bodies, a loom of minds. The first learned how to make comfort. The second learned how to make meaning. "We practice both," Naira said, eyes laughing. tail making sly letter shapes in the air. And we are patient with clumsy fingers. Corin discovered that not every alien difference required mystery. Some were simply delight wearing a new shape. When they lay quiet, he learned the second loom. How to listen for the ember's pulse humming faintly between them. How to breathe with her until his thoughts held their palms out and hers lay gently in them. Not a rush, not a flood, but a sharing like passing cups of warm tea back and forth on a cold evening. Don't force, Naira murmured, nose nearly touching his. Invite. He invited. He felt the brush of her childhood, running rooftops, getting scolded for trading a perfectly good cloak for a splintered glass whistle because it sounded like sunrise. She tasted the edge of his first solo burn through atmosphere, the way terror and joy were sometimes twins. They set boundaries by mutual consent. They laughed when the wrong memories bumped noses. They kissed to apologize to the ember for making it dizzy. Humans, Naira said afterward, cheek on his shoulder, voice. Wind season came, and with it the valley tied nets over the catwalks and weighted the roofs with bags of sand. Glass dunes scudded in long, low serpents, draping and vanishing. The rook sulked under a tarp, then tolerated Corin's hands. Resin learned to be a substitute nerve. Copper played it into a spine. The ship and the valley were learning each other, and through them, so were Corin and Naira. They also quarreled, because love lived where two wills rubbed. About risk. You don't need to be a wall every time, she snapped when he reached for a spear before she did. About caution. You don't need to measure the world twice before taking a step, he retorted when she balked at flying a test glide in the canyon. About trivialities like whether coriander belonged in stew, it did. He was wrong. They were careful with apologies. The ember warmed when they did it honestly and cooled when they were stubborn. The High Weaver, catching them mid-glare one afternoon, tossed them a coil of rope. Go tie 20 clove hitches together without biting each other, she ordered. Come back when the rope looks tidy. They returned with shaky laughter and raw palms. The rope looked very tidy. It took months, and more patience than Corin believed he owned, but one cold morning the Rook systems ran a clean checklist. The patched antenna array climbed the spectrum like a careful singer seeking harmony. The beacon finally found an answer. A frigate out of the Helix corridor. ETA 11 days. Corin's mouth went dry. He had wanted this, ached for it. He went to Naira, and they sat in their loft with their shoulders touching and the net swaying minutely. You could go, she said. Her tail was too still. I could, he said. And if I do, you could come. Naira's ears angled outward in a pained smile. I could leave the people who braided me. She looked at his hands. Or you could stay. The ember recognizes long distance, but it does not like it. He thought again, not in fear, not in calculation, but in simple inventory of heart. He had arrived as a man who measured meaning in flight plans and mission clocks. He had become someone who measured meaning in songs shared over resin light and the way a valley sighed in unison after the first cool rain. I can ask the frigate to carry a message, he said. A registry entry. A change of status. Naira's ears came forward. Corin, citizen of nowhere becomes citizen of here. You don't need my paperwork to like me, but my old life does. It can learn to adjust. She laughed and cried at the same time. Brave and practical. The dangerous combination again. Dangerous combinations built us a ship that runs on resin and stubbornness, he said, and she kissed him until the ember purred like a well-tuned engine. When the frigate burned over the glass dunes like a second aurora, the valley climbed to the roofs to watch. Corin dressed in his best, clean flight jacket, boots polished with sand, Naira's pendant twin at his throat, smaller and made the day before with Jas's help, resin set in silver. They stood again in the prism circle. The High Weaver spoke, voice carrying to the glass ridges. The ember remembers beginnings. It cherishes continuings. She looked at the sky where the frigate circled, blue engine stroking the air. It also respects choices that are made 3 times. 3, Corin whispered. Naira's smile was soft. You chose me at the dune. You chose me at the second door. Now choose where your feet sleep. He looked up at the frigate shining like a thought of home. He looked at the valley. He looked at Naira, orange fur glinting like fire in the sun, ears forward, tail steady as a metronome. I choose, he said. Here, with you. The valley's cheer went through him like a physical wave. He sent the frigate a message. It left with a new registry code in its logs and a pilot's personnel file annotated, reassigned by personal petition to Aurealis 3. Mission, Cultural Exchange and Ecosystem Engineering. Ecosystem engineering? Naira asked, amused. I am going to fix your storm gutters, he said, and teach the Ridge clans to stop being jerks. Ambitious. Dangerous combination. After choices come ordinary days, and that was the secret wonder, how they glittered when lit by purpose. Corin set about making the Rook a permanent workshop instead of a ship. He built wind vanes that sang when storms approached. Their notes keyed to the ember's heat so the valley could feel a warning as well as hear it. Naira took him up for glides at dawn, their breath white dragon smoke in the cold. They mapped the valley in long sweeps, learned to read the way glass dunes migrated like herds. The Ridge clan, on the longest night when the aurora draped low and the ember pendants all glowed like a second constellation, Naira and Corin lay in the loft and counted the things that had once been impossible. A human and a vulpine linked by an ember, Naira said, tail looping his ankle. A ship running on the valley's blood, Corin said, stroking the place behind her ear that made her hum. Me sleeping through a storm. Me liking coriander. He grinned. It was inevitable. They breathed together, and the ember behind his sternum warmed. The second loom wove quiet patterns, a memory of their first kiss that still made his heart jump. The feel of the induction grid, thrumming underfoot the day they didn't die. The realization that he had learned a new constellation and named it home. Once, the sky was everything, he said. Naira's ears ticked, affectionate. It still is, we just chose a place to stand when we look up. They looked up together. The aurora curved like a smile. The valley rustled and settled. The ember remembered, and for once, remembering was future as much as past. The first thaw after wind season turned the dunes to singing. When the sun spilled low across the valley, the glass plates hummed together, a chorus of thin, bright notes. Naira taught Corin to walk in time so the dune floor under them shifted from discord into a single, held tone. Our elders say the desert keeps the imprint of those who cross it, she said. If you learn the pitch of your old path, you can find your way home again. He tested it, stepping as she did. Heel, toe, pause, then matching her breath. Their combined weight coaxed the glass to ring on the same note as Naira's pendant, a modest F sharp. Corin laughed aloud, dizzy with the beauty and absurdity of it. Your planet is a cathedral, he said, and we are two fools ringing the bells with our feet. Fools loved by a cathedral, Naira amended. She squinted across the western ridge. Come. There's a place I want to show you. They climbed through a notch where the wind had chewed the ridge to a thin lip, then slid down a lee into a basin walled with ochre basalt. In the basin's center, a single shard rose 3 stories high, clear as river ice and veined with threads of trapped lightning. Naira put her palm to it. The shard brightened, pulses racing up the veins like fish. Echo keep, she said. It holds the last 3 storms in its skin. Watch. The lightning threads replayed. First a lazy rain with languid flickers, then a bounding squall, rapid bright beats, finally, the long, hard gale that had hammered them a month ago. Corin pressed his hand beside hers. The shard recognized the ember in his chest and let him feel the shape of those tempests, the way the valley tucked its shoulders, how the catwalks vibrated like plucked strings. He swayed, overwhelmed. Useful, not just pretty, Naira murmured. If we can read how a storm writes itself, maybe we can learn to write softer storms. Engineer the weather, Corin asked, half scandalized, half enthralled. Back home, that sentence buys you a committee and 1,000 permissions. Naira's ears pitched forward in delight. Then good thing home is here. We'll start with windbreaks tuned to the Echo Keep's notes. Music that persuades the gusts to spend themselves where we choose. He grinned at her dangerous combination. Let's build an orchestra. They turned the valley into staves and measures. Jas hammered copper chimes tuned to the storm pulses Echo Keep recorded, stringing them along the ridge trails. Naira climbed like a bright fox spirit, setting resin resonators in narrow clefts where wind sharpened into a knife. Corin bolted pivoting vanes along catwalk posts. When gusts pressed hard, the vanes swung to present a perforated face that sang the same pitch as the chimes. The High Weaver called them fussy toys, and then, when the first test squall passed gentler than expected, hid a smile on her sleeve. Perhaps your toys can remain, she conceded, provided they do not fall on anyone's head. They measured, adjusted, argued, kissed, slept like stones, and did it again. The valley learned new songs. The storms did not stop. They were part of Borealis 3's grammar, but their worst teeth dulled. Night after night, families slept through what used to wake them shaking. In the quiet between projects, Corin finally taught Naira the slow mathematics of orbital windows. She sprawled on her stomach in the loft, tail ticking with concentration, as he sketched ellipses and transfer arcs on a slate. You stole wind from a storm, he said. I can borrow time from the sky. He showed her how two bodies tugged and traded momentum. He traced the place where a ship could fall forward forever. Balance, he agreed. His finger slowed over the arc and, unable to help himself, drifted to trace the whorl behind her ear. Also, curves. Flatterer, she said, pleased. They began a new kind of map then, not of ground or weather but of neighboring circles of life. Naira drew the paths traders took through canyons where salt crusted pink. Corin marked the spots where ridge clans paused to mend their boots. See, he said, tapping a convergence. They camp here often. Because of the cistern, Naira said. It's always sweet there. So we bring gifts there, not to their door, Corin concluded. Neutral ground to teach neutral minds. He, who learned diplomacy from stubborn men, Naira teased. Who married a fox who could out-stubborn a mountain? He shot back. Flatterer twice. Guilty. Peace blinked and showed its teeth again. The fever came on a slow wind from the southern flats. Quiet at first. 2 kits with glazed eyes, a weaver too dizzy to thread, an elder sitting down mid-step. By nightfall, 10 hammocks sagged under shivering bodies, and resin pendants cooled instead of warming. A bad sign no one needed translated. Corin's hands remembered a different set of motions, rapid triage, sterile rituals, the disciplined fear that came with sickbay sirens. The valley's healers brewed steam with crushed leaves that smelled like almond and smoke. They dosed honeyed tinctures. They frowned at stubborn chills. Your planet sings, Corin told himself as he stared at a petri dish improvised from a glass shard and a copper ring. So let the sickness leave a note. He spun a sliver of resin into a thin film, laid a drop of fever sweat on it, and warmed it with his breath. Threads lit where the resin carried charge, dimmed where the sweat's proteins resisted. A pattern emerged, a shy pulse off-key from healthy amber. Off-key? Naira said hoarsely. She hadn't slept. Can you? Retune? Maybe, Corin said, jaw tight, if we can make the resin vibrate at the inverse, like canceling a sound wave. He built a lattice, hair-fine copper, resin nodes at each crossing, small enough to cup in a hand. He tuned it with the Echo Keep, matching the fever's dead waveform with a living countersong. The first time he laid it against a kit's wrist, nothing happened. The second time, the lattice warmed. The kit's pendant brightened. The fever peeled back a degree. The third, the kid sat up and said, hungry. The High Weaver folded without grace into a chair and laughed helplessly into her palms. They passed the lattice from hammock to hammock like passing bread at a sacred meal. It didn't fix all at once. It nudged the body to do the rest. At dawn, the hammock sagged under sleepers instead of fighters. At noon, the valley ate on the roofs, every table crowded. At sunset, Naira fell asleep with her head in Corin's lap, and woke to find his hand still in her fur. Both of them damp-eyed and grinning like fools who had stolen a day back from the dark. "Your toys may remain," the High Weaver said again, eyes bright, voice rough. "Forever, if they like." When people don't die, they grow curious. The Ridge clan sent a delegation, 3 scarred women, a lanky youth with eyes like chips of flint, a small child who hid under a cloak and watched with a wolf cub solemnity. They stood just inside the valley's line of shadow as if sunlight and shade were borders painted on the ground. "We heard your sickness sang," the oldest woman said. "We heard you taught the song to stop." "We did?" the High Weaver said. "We also remember rain belongs to no one." The old woman spat to the side, not an insult, but as if clearing a taste of old iron. "We want to trade. Teach us the stop song. We will teach you how to tell when glass will slide and bury your goats." "Deal?" Corin said before anyone could fidget into suspicion. Naira's ear bumped his shoulder. Proud warning, amused. He took the hint and added, "On neutral ground. By the cistern." They met at dusk with chimes and ropes and a single pot of stew neither side could claim as hosts. Naira taught the youth to place resin nodes where a pulse skipped. He, in turn, showed her how to read crust ripples on the skin of a dune to see if its belly was full of moving glass. The solemn child crept close to Corin and poked his boot, then his calf, then his knee, as if determining where the human stopped and the boot began. "Careful," Corin murmured. "That part bites." The child flinched, then saw his smile and bared small teeth in return. Mistrustful, delighted. She lifted her hood. Under it, not fox ears, not human, but soft triangular nubs like buds waiting for rain. "A stray," the old woman said, eyes sliding away. "We found her in the flats. Her parents fed the glass." A month later, the child arrived with a bundle and a stubborn set to her jaw. Naira bent, level with the small glare. "Do you want to learn how to make storms sing softer?" she asked. The child nodded. "Good," Naira said. "Then your first lesson is tying clove hitches until you want to chew the rope. Ask Corin why." "I deserve that," he sighed as 2 pairs of bright eyes, one amber, one a flint chip softened by time, conspired over him. In Vulpre custom, names lengthen with life. Naira, once simply Naira Sylvain, carried new syllables now. Naira Sylvain Emberrit, in honor of the fever lattice. Naira of the wind quiet, because her veins made restless nights calmer. Naira 2 doors chosen, spoken with a private smile in certain circles. Corin, whose culture tended toward fixed labels, accepted with bewildered pride the name the valley braided for him. Corin Marek Copperhand, Corin Between, Corin of the Warm Map. The stray earned hers slowly and on purpose. She refused half of them with a ferocity that made elders hide their grins. "Not quiet feet," she growled one morning. "My feet are loud, and that's good." In the end she accepted Vasha under sun because she liked to nap on roof tiles with the pendant's heat on her cheek. "Vasha under sun," Corin said, tasting how it sat in the mouth. "Engineer in training, terror of coils, champion of clove hitches." Vasha bared her teeth in honor. "You still bite?" she asked, poking his boot. He pretended to gnaw the air until she shrieked with glee and climbed him like a pillar. On the day Vasha asked for a pendant, the High Weaver braided silver while Naira set resin with precise taps. Corin held the dish so the molten bead could cool without bubbling. Vasha stood very straight, trying not to look too proud. When the pendant touched her throat, the resin warmed faintly, the smallest ember acknowledging the smallest chest. Vasha's eyes went round, then wet. She took a single, fierce breath, as if testing that her rib cage could hold this new brother heart. "Listen," Naira whispered. "It will not tell you what to do, but it remembers when you choose to be brave." "Like when I chose to come," Vasha said. "Exactly," Corin said, a ridiculous thickness in his throat. "Exactly that." The frigate that had once offered rescue sent a courier drone months later, a glittering beetle that dropped neatly onto Corin's work table and unfolded into a packet of letters. He and Naira laughed like children, greedy and shy all at once. News from the Helix corridor, a research charter approved, supply drops scheduled, a cautious stipend for planetary climate harmonics experimentation. What does that mean? Jas demanded, peering over his shoulder. It means the committees wrote poetry by accident, Corin said, delighted. It also means we can ask for certain alloys and not trade 3 goats for them. There was a personal letter, too, from the captain who had once waited 11 days above the dunes. I argued for you, she wrote. Not because I wanted to steal you back, but because someone needed to write in a ledger that choosing love is a form of service. Corin folded the page carefully and put it in the box where he kept their first ember pendants and the chalk Naira had refused to sweep, because it smelled like the day he taught her ellipses. They built a beacon of their own then, not for distress but for invitation. A resin core lattice tuned to the valley's new songs, it pealed a low, patient note into the upper air whenever a ship passed. We are here, it said, with no plea or apology. We are doing something you might want to learn. Visitors came. A linguist who fell weeping at the first canyon chorus and had to be revived with stew. A pair of agronomists who asked shyly if storms could be taught to drop more rain on parched terraces and less on already kind rivers. An old spacer who had seen 12 planets and yet stared at Echo Keep like a pilgrim at a shrine, whispering, I thought I had no new astonishments left. Take your time, Naira told them all, tail steady. We are not a miracle. We are neighbors. Ears open and close like hands. The valley learned new ease without becoming soft. The ridge clans learned new ways to be proud without needing to steal to prove it. Vasha under sun grew into her limbs, into her pendant, into her habit of squinting up at problems as if daring them to be bigger. The High Weaver dyed the gray in her fur a festive blue and called it refusing to rust. Corin and Naira found themselves speaking in a plural they hadn't planned but could not imagine giving back. They spoke of our roof, our chimes, our stove that was forever slightly crooked because Corin had insisted on leveling it with a wedge that turned. He didn't understand until the ember behind his sternum answered a second ember he didn't carry. It was so small he would have missed it if he hadn't been touching where Naira's body wrote the new note. He went very still. Then he laughed. Then he cried. Then he made a sound Vasha later described as like a goat that learned math. Mathematically, he said later, wiping his eyes on his sleeve, we are several dangerous combinations inside one house. Architecturally, Naira returned, eyes shining, we will need more pegs for tiny coats. They told the valley at dusk under the prisms. The High Weaver looked up at the aurora and barked at it half-joking, half-command. Brighten for them, the aurora obliged, pouring a little extra silk across the sky. Vasha stood with her arms crossed and an expression of older than her years' relief, as if a rivet she'd been watching for months had finally seated right. Third thing, she said solemnly to the unsteady stars, we will teach you clove hitches early. The child came in spring while the dunes were docile and the chimes light. They named him Arlen Three Notes because he announced himself by thumping his foot against Naira's ribs in a rhythm that made Corin say, with professional admiration, good timing. He was orange like Naira, where he wasn't human soft like Corin with ears that forgot they were big and therefore bumped doorways until he learned to fold them at the right moment. His pendant barely warmed at first, then found its courage the day Vasha tucked him into a sling and marched him up to Echo, Keep to show him where storms wrote history. Life did not stop being sharpened. The fever tried again from a different angle and learned that the valley now had a chorus ready to sing it flat. A trader broke a promise and was required to repair 3 roofs and listen to 3 hours of the High Weaver talking about nets. The Ridge clans elected a leader who believed firmly in being a good ancestor, which meant some days were boring in the best possible way. Once a year, the courier drone still came. They sent back not lists of needs but scores, literal ones, notations of wind sonatas and rain fugues that other planets asked timidly if they might try. Once, in a bright fit of audacity, Corin and Naira attached a recording. The valley singing at solstice, Arlen's infant coos threaded through. Vasha's laugh cracking once and then getting it back. The captain, who had argued for Corin, wrote after, "I played it on the bridge." We all stood still and listened. For 2 minutes the corridor forgot it was made of schedules. On a winter night when the aurora hung heavy and the stove made that guilty click, Corin and Naira sat wrapped in a blanket while Arlen drooled on Corin's collar and Vasha muttered at a coil that had the bad manners to kink. The ember's warmth filled the room like an extra person. Corin looked at Naira, at the line of her cheek in the hearth light, at the ears that had learned when to fold and when to dare doorways. "I used to think adventure meant motion," he said softly. "Now I think it means choosing one place and letting it deepen until it contains the whole sky." Naira snorted lightly, affectionate. "It was always both. You just needed to learn the second way of traveling." They breathed together. The pendant at Naira's throat warmed, the one at Corin's answered. Arlen, half asleep, made a small sound that matched them, as if his tiny ribs already knew the household's metronome. Outside, Wynne leaned against the vanes and then thought better of it, persuaded by a song. The Echo Keep held 3 storms and made room for a 4th. The glass dunes kept a record of 2 sets of footsteps teaching a 3rd how to find home by pitch. The Ember remembered, and remembering made room for tomorrow. It began as a shiver in the teacups. Corin steadied the tray. The clay sang a thin, complaining note. Naira's ears went high, tail arrested mid-sway. Across the catwalks, a ripple moved through the crowd like fur brushed backward. Pendants dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. The Echo Keep flared without touch, lightning threads nodding. "Quake," Jas breathed, fingers white on a railing. "But the bedrock doesn't?" The floor answered with a long, bending moan. Not a fall, not a crack, but a resonance, every glass plate in the basin agreeing on a wrong note. Catwalk cables thrummed. One rooftop slid 2 finger widths and stopped only when a sandbag thumped it back into line. Corin ran for the Echo Keep with Naira and Vasha at his heels. The shard burned with tangled light, triplets and counter-triplets that stepped on each other, tripping the valley. Hanging swung, beads clattered, children huddled under tables because adults sometimes need the excuse of comforting to take comfort. The High Weaver stood in the open with her hands on the shard, eyes narrowed in thought rather than fear. "We've tuned wind and rain," she said. "We did not tune the bones. That is a thing I did not know could be tuned." "We can try," Corin said. "If we can find the note that's wrong." They sent runners, light feet, over careful bridges to set chimes along fault lines mapped by Vasha's careful eye. "Listen for discord," Naira told them, "and when you hear it, send the word back, the letter shape of the sound." The first runner returned, low and wide like a drum spilled into a cave. The second, sharp, a stitch pulled too tight. The third didn't have words. She whistled a single aching tone that made pendants flicker in sympathy. "2 culprits," Corin concluded. "The basin lip and the south terraces. The lip is the drum, the terraces are the stitch." He scribbled with charcoal on slate. "Nodes here, counter nodes there, the valley itself a body to be soothed. We'll lace a brace across the lip, tuned to swallow that low note. And we'll loosen the terrace's anchor chimes 1 notch, so they stop trying to hold the earth too still." Naira kissed his temple without thinking. "Go," she said. "I'll be your echo at the south." Vasha, eyes wide and blazing, snatched coils and tools. "Tell me where." "Here," Naira said, tapping the slate. "And here. And if anything hums like a wasp nest, don't touch. Call." The quake deepened once more, then softened, as if the valley, hearing itself named, grew less determined to shudder. By dusk, the new braces sang. By night, the Echo Keep's knots loosened into readable threads. Naira came home with sand in her hair, Corin with glass scratched forearms, Vasha with rope burns she refused to notice. They ate standing up. They laughed in the scrap-boned way of people who have outrun a fall and are only now allowing their knees to shake. "Bones can be tuned," the High Weaver said, voice rough and fond. "Add that to your book of new indecencies." Days later, a messenger from the Ridge clans arrived with dust on her cheeks and apology in her posture. "Our South Ridge fractured?" she said without ceremony. Not a fall. Arguing. We did not know rock could sulk. Naira tilted her head. We learned the same lesson yesterday. Bring us where the sulk speaks loudest. They walked the broken ridge at dawn. Corin Nira Vasha, the messenger named Sereth, whose smile came out sideways when she forgot to guard it. The fracture was not a cleft, but a lace of hairlines, the kind that could widen to swallowing if insulted further. Wind tested the gaps and made a thin flute sound that set teeth on edge. It's singing itself apart, Corin said. We can either change its song or muffle every mouth. He looked at Naira. You take the first, I'll build the second. Naira found a cleft that bit the wind hardest and set 3 resin nodes like teeth around it. She hummed into the cleft, ears pivoting to catch the return. Vasha watched her teacher's throat, then tried a lower tone, then higher, until the cleft answered not with a screech but with a sigh. There, Naira said, and grinned. Ask nicely and the ridge admits it is tired. Corin, hands numb in the thin morning, bolted a line of perforated baffles along the worst run, their holes graduated like a pan flute. The wind, captured and split, lost its knife edge and learned to mutter instead. Sereth crouched and pressed her ear to the stone. It sounds less angry, she judged. More. Old. Old doesn't have to break, Vasha said fiercely, as if trending toward age were an insult to defy with tools. They left gifts and took nothing, a rule made of mutual burn scars. Sereth walked them to the cistern at dusk, where shared stew tasted of relief. We owe you, she said to Naira. You can name it. Naira looked at the little wind instrument of baffles, at Vasha's rope burned hands, at Corin rubbing warmth back into his fingers. Bring your elders when the next storm season turns, she said finally. Not for trade, for song. We're writing something here that belongs to more ears than ours. Sereth's sideways smile came unguarded, wide as a cliff. Deal, she said. And this time we will bring our own bowls. The beacon's patient note reached farther than they expected. One afternoon a caravan skimmed into the basin with banners sewn from star charts, travelers with wrists stacked in mementos from 20 ports. Pilgrims, they called themselves. Listeners, collectors, shy thieves of the sacred, who asked permission first. They offered a curious tithe, vials of air from their favorite places. Smell. The valley laughed, sniffed, argued over whether the ring was truly odorless. The pilgrims asked to hear the solstice chorus, not as a recording but as breath. We won't share it without your say, their leader promised. We know some songs are not ours to carry. The High Weaver called a council under the prisms. The argument broke sweetly into 2. Those who believed generosity made a song stronger, and those who feared thieving ears. We sang to save ourselves, Jas said. Why should strangers wear our rescue like jewelry? Because the sky has more mouths than ours, Naira answered. When we needed the captain to speak for us, she did. This is the same shape in another direction. Vasha stood, pendant steady. Make a condition, she said. They take the chorus, but only if they take the clove hitches too. They carry the craft with the breath. Laughter scattered, the brightness under it had agreement in it. The pilgrims accepted the condition humbly. We will tie what you tell us to, and for 3 days learn knots, storm reading, the difference between pride and arrogance when you stand on glass. In exchange, they opened their vials one by one on the roof at sunset. The valley smelled a harbor it had never seen and an honest emptiness between worlds, and someone began crying for no reason that could be explained and then laughed at themselves while still crying. When the pilgrims left, the beacon's note seemed to take on a harmony it hadn't had, not louder, but layered. We are not leaking, the High Weaver said dryly to mollify those whose brows still insisted on furrowing. We are irrigating. A quarrel as old as the basin woke up angry. 2 households wrestling over a terrace line drawn 3 generations past when the wind ran another way. They had endured each other with elaborate politeness for years. Now a chance insult in a market exploded into shoves and a cut lip and a chorus of, oh, now we're saying what we've been thinking. Council? Jas suggested, resigned. Throw stew at them until they tell the truth. Trial by listening, Naira said instead, tail steady. If we trust our ears for storms, we should trust them for people. They strung a hearing circle beside the echo keep, 8 seats, 2 empty. 1 for each household and 1 for someone who knew neither well. Corin built a small resonator tuned not to ember or weather but to the human register. It brightened by fractions when voice and body told the same story, and dulled when they contradicted. Not a lie detector, he refused that frame, but a courage meter, a device that rewarded the risk of honesty. It turned out both households had been careful with the truth and sloppy with the courage. The terrace line had been drawn correctly for the wind, then the wind had moved. So had goats. So had the well that used to be reliable. The resonator brightened most when an elder with hands like roots admitted she had let her pride do math for her. It dimmed when a younger man tried to hide his fear of being seen as less useful. Ah, the High Weaver said, soft. There you are. She adjusted the line not by taking, but by asking each to take a different kind of work. One household to maintain the new wind vanes the ridge required, the other to keep the cistern sweet so no child ever took a mouthful of rot and learned caution the hard way. After, Corin caught Naira's eye. You just invented restorative justice with chimes. She shrugged, ears pleased. We'd already invented it with stew. I only added a resonator to make the shy brave. Vasha, who had watched, squinted thoughtfully at the courage meter. Can you make one that brightens when I am about to do something very clever and very stupid? She asked. So that I may choose between them faster? No, Corin and Naira said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed because they both wished they could. Far east of the basin lay a hollow the color of old coins. Locals called it the Sea of Mirrors. No one lived there. Story said it ate travelers by confusing their eyes and singing them into circles. Which meant, of course, that Vasha begged to go. We go as a question, not a conquest, Naira warned, tightening straps on packs. We leave enough rope to follow home by hand even if our eyes lie. Corin tuned a hand beacon to the valley's bass note and set a second to echo Keep's latest song. If we lose sight, he said, looping the cords around his wrist, we'll follow Braille. The Sea of Mirrors was a bowl of fused plates that reflected not just sky but the suggestion of sky clouds that weren't there. A bird doubled, a foxwoman tripled until Naira looked like an army at her own shoulder. Sound behaved politely. Light did not. The sun made staircases. At the basin's heart they found not a monster, but a stillness, no wind, no dust, only a listening that made throat clearing seem rude. Corin knelt and pressed a resin node to the glass. It warmed and lit, then refused to travel. It doesn't want our song, he said, surprised and oddly relieved. It wants. Silence, Naira finished, eyes wide. A bowl for holding emptiness without shame. They set a cairn anyhow, 4 plates balanced so perfectly that one more would have toppled everything. On its top Naira scratched a mark, not a claim, but a courtesy. We were here and chose to be soft. Vasha added a clove hitch around the cairn because knots are how I say hello, and then, satisfied, did not ask to conquer anything further. On the way out, Corin's beacon thrummed like a heart returning to its rate after a held breath. When they turned back at the ridge to look, the Sea of Mirrors appeared to be exactly what it was, an honest absence. They waved to it anyway. Years have a way of folding in ways the body doesn't notice until it stands up and splinters like a wooden bench. The High Weaver, never fragile, began to ride rather than walk long distances. The ride became a carved chair hung from 2 patient shoulders. The chair acquired bells. I deserve bells, she declared, daring anyone to disagree. Arlen learned to fold his ears before doorways on the 3rd try and only occasionally forgot when excited. He built a model of the basin out of wire and glass chips and showed Naira how storms touched it by tapping in patterns. Vasha began courting a Ridge Clan smith with forearms like tree trunks and a laugh you felt in your ribs. This involved many visits to the cistern and much pretending not to be seen. Corin discovered 2 new kinds of tired. One pure sweetness from days full of work worth doing, one the heavy kind that made him sit down on a stair and watched us dance for 10 minutes without moving. "Home is a verb," Naira said one night, looping her tail around his shin. "It's not a place we stand, but a thing we do." "What are its tenses?" he asked, unable to resist. "Present continuous," she said promptly. "And imperative, on days when Vasha is building something that wants to kick." They grew moss on the north faces of pillars on purpose because it pleased the eye and damped echoes. They taught the pilgrims how to leave quieter footprints. They replaced the first induction grid with a better one and kept the old parts on hooks, where Arlen could bang them with sticks and learn that music is just math with feelings. Sometimes Corin woke panicking, the old itch to run skyward gnawing. He would go to the roof and breathe until the beacon's low chord found his sternum. Then Naira would arrive without question and lean into his side until the itch had a second option. "The sky is still there," she would murmur. "It is bigger now because it has to contain our roof." He laughed every time and believed her every time. The aurora draped itself extravagant the night the High Weaver called them all with a bell that sounded like the past standing up. She sat in her bell chair, blue-dyed gray gone to silver, eyes the same sharp astringent as always. "I am not dying," she began, "which is an inconvenient opener because you are all about to try to be noble at me. I am only folding, as benches do. Before I squeak too much to be useful, it is time to speak the thing I have kept in my sleeve." She nodded to Naira and Corin. "You braided a new craft here. You made storms courteous. You convinced glass to remember better. You showed me that strangers can be kin if we let the ember judge action and not origin. I wish to give you a piece of the weaving I carry. Not a rank. Ranks are hats that fall off when you run, but a charge." She held out two pendants, twins to their own but threaded with a pale thread that had never touched anyone's throat. "Keepers of the warm map," she said. "Not of borders or claims, but of ways. Your task is to add paths, erase none, and teach anyone who asks how to read breath, wind, and stubbornness without weaponizing them." Naira's ears went too high for composure. Corin's mouth forgot language for a moment. Vasha whooped. Arlen climbed halfway into his father's lap and only then remembered his dignity and slid back down with a hiccuping laugh. The Ridge Clan smith pounded a knee appreciatively. Bells approved. "Legacy is not a monument," the High Weaver went on, eyes warm. "It is a practice. If the next keepers after you do not need your names to do the work, then you did the work correctly." They accepted with hands that shook. The pendants warmed at their throats. The ember behind Corin's sternum answered with a steady, grateful thrum. Later, on the roof under a sky overgenerous with silk, Naira leaned. He considered, smiling. "Ah, not motion, not deepening. The third way is tending. Moving outward by making a place that pulls others into more of themselves." "Keeper," she said, proud and teasing. "Dangerous combination." "Always," he answered, and kissed her, and felt the valley lean closer to hear, as valleys do when they are learning how to be homes, and homes are learning how to be verbs that go on and on and on. The years folded softly after that, like parchment worn thin by retelling. The rook, long since retired from flight, became a library of metals and memories. Children, vulpine and human, both crawled through its hull chasing echoes, learning which panels hummed when you spoke secrets into them. Vasha's workshop filled the terraces with laughter and sparks. The Ridge Clan smith built a forge beside hers, swearing the glass dunes made better mirrors than anvils. Arlen grew into his mother's fire and his father's patience, forever asking why storms curved instead of marching straight. Naira said it was because even wind prefers to dance. Corin said it was because straight lines forget to look around. The High Weaver's bells still chimed, though no shoulders carried her now. Only wind and memory. Her chair stood beneath the prisms, draped in blue. People still left offerings there, not of gold or prayer, but of promises written on copper slivers. "I will teach someone what I know. I will listen before I fix. I will forgive before I am asked." On the eve of the 10th solstice since the ember's first choosing, the valley sang again. Every terrace, every ridge, even the stubborn sea of mirrors giving back a shy reflection of light. The chorus rose through the thin air, climbed past the clouds, and brushed the belly of a passing freighter. Its crew turned off the engines for a full minute, simply listening. In some distant registry, the planet Aurealis 3 acquired a second designation, Corin Marek, after the two who had taught it harmony. When the song ended, Naira stood beside Corin on the same dune where once he had heard a scream and decided to run toward it. The glass was warm under their boots. She reached for his hand, claws tracing the old calluses that time had not erased. "The Ember remembers beginnings," she murmured. "And endings," he said. She shook her head, smiling that fox smile that had undone him the first day. "No, the Ember doesn't remember endings, only continuations." They watched the twin suns slide over the rim of the world, painting everything in amber and gold. Below them, the valley breathed, homes flickering like constellations turned upside down, the chimes answering each gust as if the planet itself were alive and listening. And when the light caught their pendants, they glowed as one. Corin thought of the path that had brought him here, a crash, a rescue, a misunderstanding turned into a marriage, and the miracle of two species learning the same word for home. He thought of how every risk worth taking had felt exactly like this moment, full of quiet, trembling peace. Naira leaned into him, tail curling around his leg. "Keeper of the warm map," she whispered, voice like wind through glass. "Where to next?" Corin smiled, eyes on the horizon where dawn became day. "Wherever the ember hums," he said. "And maybe, if we've done it right, it will hum forever." The suns rose higher. The dunes sang back. And the story of the human and the vulpine girl, of warmth born from courage, of a valley that learned to sing, became another thread in the endless tapestry of the living stars,